People with nightmare siblings. What's the most messed up thing they ever did? I'm seeing some pretty messed up stuff on here, and my stories don't really compare, but I have a few things. For one, my older brother gets pissed really easily and once flipped over a glass table in our living room. The whole thing shattered and I cut my foot. Don't remember what he was mad about since I was only around 4 or 5, but he must have been in his early teens at that point. Parents replaced it with custom-fitted glass, which was pretty expensive, apparently. He also taped a knife to my parents' door once, which everyone assumed was a threat. He insisted he wasn't going to do anything, just wanted to scare them. He was at least 20 at that time. A lot of the things I can think of are verbal, where he'll scream at people for tiny insignificant things. He's rarely physically violent. It's just that he'll break your stuff when you're not around and indirectly threaten you, ignore you for weeks at a time, etc. Everyone has to constantly walk on eggshells around him because of how explosive he is, and I can thank him for how sensitive and quiet I am. There was also this time he pushed me into the sliding glass door because I didn't know if the phone had rung or not. After about 5 minutes of him yelling about the phone, I snapped and said, "Just leave me alone!" And his response was to shove me, crack the glass, and everything. Story 2. It's a toss-up between 3 things my brother has done. A. Found out my brother and his wife were not separated and getting a divorce, something he'd been telling the whole family for over a year and she knew nothing about until I inadvertently said something to her. B. His posting on Facebook that my mother had passed away just to get sympathy likes. She was sick, but not yet dead, and I had to wake up and handle the massive freakout from relatives and friends. He then claimed he hadn't known it would be taken that way even though people were sending him public condolences and talking about her in the past tense. C. Got confirmation from someone who knows him really well that he lied about having cancer at one point. Again, pretty sure that was for the sympathy and likes. There's a lot more and enough for a show times 10, but those are just the 3 biggest that impacted me and or I can't forgive him for. He also lied about having hurt his back so he couldn't come to our mother's funeral. Only 2 weeks later, he posted photos of himself online holding his contractor's license, bragging about the jobs he was doing. He's never answered me on what miracle operation or treatment did he get to cure his bad back so fast, and hasn't spoken to me since that day. Nothing of value has been lost. Story 3. My sister is a convicted kitty fiddler who used to do horrible things to our grandparents' foster children. She also did nasty things to me and our cousins. She convinced our dad to sign for a car loan for her when she was in her early 20s because she had already trashed her credit. She never paid any of it, and he was already struggling financially. It sent into a downward spiral that ultimately ended in his death from coding years later, after being rendered homeless. She's always loved to date gang members, one of whom was implicated in the case of ending one of her cousins, who shared a father but have different mothers. She was subsequently caught sleeping with multiple police officers to get information on the case to keep her evil boyfriend out of jail. And that same arse breed 2 innocent people who had nothing to do with the gangs involved or ended after begging for their lives. They just both happened to walk past at the wrong time. She still doesn't think her now ex-boyfriend should be in jail. Happily, he was convicted and won't be getting out of jail in this lifetime. She got married a few years later. A few months after the wedding on Christmas Day, she tells her new husband, who by all accounts was actually a decent guy, that she's going out for milk or something, and she never comes back. When our father was in the hospital and I was having to have him taken off of life support, she kept telling everyone she was on her way. Please wait for her. I did. For 2 days. Turns out she lied. Never left her house, about 8 hours away, and thought it was hilarious she made us all wait. This is all on top of the mental and emotional I suffered at her hands for years. She broke things I cared about, would keep me awake, and hit me with belts and barbecue tools if I fell asleep, for days at a time. I'm pretty sure she ended my grandparents' dog. She still posts on FB occasionally, from what I hear. After what happened with my dad, I sent her a message that I hoped she died alone and blocked her on everything. She's a monster. I've never been this thankful to have a sane sibling. Wow. Story 4. My brother is 5 years older than me. When he turned 12, my folks trusted him to watch me when they went out for short trips to the store, dinner, whatnot. When I was about 8, I got into a terrible fight with my brother one night when he was watching me. I think it started with something stupid. I wanted to watch a movie, and he wanted the living room and TV to watch something I thought was scary. He told me to go upstairs to my room. We almost always came to blows over everything. His reactions to arguments were always to get inches from your face and scream as loud as he could and puff up to intimidate. He 100% learned this from our father. He then would put hands on you if you stepped up to him. And I often did, and as I started to do to my father as well. Then we started screaming at each other and he slapped me across the face. I was so shocked I fell on my butt and looked at him in disbelief. He'd split my lower lip. He hit me so hard. I started to cry and I said I was going to call our grandmother, who lived about 30 minutes away. This was before cell phones and I didn't think about calling my folks wherever they were. As soon as I stood to run to the phone, he grabbed me by the collar of my shirt and tried to keep me away from the phone. I screamed and tried to push him away, but he grabbed my hair with his other hand and forced me into the ground. He was behind me, his arms shifted into a bear hug, his legs wrapped around mine, and I couldn't move. I felt his arms shift, and one of his forearms went around my neck, and his opposite hand clasped over my mouth, and then my nose. I screamed, or tried, that I couldn't breathe. I couldn't suck in any air at all. I clawed at his arms, but remember trying to kick my legs and found they couldn't budge. We writhed like that for what felt like a long time, but I clearly remember fading out and going dark. When I woke up, I was laying on the floor and I had peed myself at some point. I remember feeling so ashamed of that later. I felt so tired and sore, but I looked up and saw my brother sitting on the couch watching his movie and completely ignoring me. He had unplugged the 2 phones we had and had them in his lap. I couldn't move for a long time, and I remember just laying there, hurting in my lungs, crying, but quietly because when I sucked in air, my chest felt broken. He didn't even look at me, but he said if I told Mom or Dad, he would end me. I eventually crawled into the kitchen, walked up the stairs, slipped out of all my wet clothes, and fell into bed and went to sleep. I never told my parents. He's now 38, heard me many times before and after that incident, before he left the house at 18, but never that bad. He's a deadbeat dad, currently in prison for his 5th DUI and possession charge, homeless when not in prison, has never held a job more than a few months, lies, cheats, steals, and my dad still loves him to death. I don't think I've ever loved my brother. So many people have had similar experiences, and that breaks my heart. I hope everyone who has or is struggling with a person in their life finds the help they need. I didn't speak up when I was little, and I didn't think about it until today. Speak up. I wish I had a stronger voice back then. I didn't know this post would even get read. It spilled out of me this afternoon when reading the life experiences of other people and how they're working through their trauma. Their stories spoke so clearly to my own that before I realized it, I was posting this memory. I'm so very grateful to everyone for their supportive words. My heart feels so full right now. For those who are asking, I'm doing well now. I ended up marrying my high school sweetheart. We've been married nearly 13 years. I work as a judge's assistant in a family court, and plans to go into law school and work in the DA's office. I have a beautiful baby girl who we worship. Jury is out on if she will get a sibling. Oh man, this is a hard read. For someone to tell their story with almost exact details means it was probably too much. For those people who are experiencing this, speak up, if possible. I hope things get better for you. If you have time, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. This helps me make better content every day, and maybe my videos could help a lot of you going through tough times. Story 5. My brother is 7 years older than me. He was my hero growing up and could do no wrong in my eyes. He treated me more like a little brother than a little sister. I have so many great memories of those times. After I graduated high school, he began to change, becoming increasingly mean to outright verbally and emotionally evil. Eventually escalated to getting too physical towards his girlfriends, ex-wives, and myself. Outwardly, he's very charming and charismatic. In private, he's hateful, bitter, does too much alcohol and painkillers, and will take it out on you. He has hit me in the face, threw me against a wall, broke the front door to get to me in the house, broke into the house and came into my room pointing a loaded gun at me, kicked me in the stomach when I said Mom loved me. His dog got hit by a car. He was blackout drunk and refused to get up to help me get the dog to the vet. I lifted and carried his Port St. Bernard into the car myself. Don't worry, Doggo only had a broken leg and he's fine now. That night, he came stumbling up the house, still drunk, and began screaming at her mom. He pushed her, threatening to hurt my cat, then began a fistfight with me in the kitchen. Mom was on the phone with 911 screaming. That was the nail in the coffin of our relationship. Why did he become like this? Who knows? Maybe it was the multiple TBIs, the alcohol, the painkiller, or maybe a little of all the above. He can definitely control it. He made sure to only hurt me when I was home alone, except for the choking incident, and does the same with his exes or future exes. Story 6. My brother came into my care when my mom died when he was 10. He was a nightmare, running away, throwing fits, being violent. He didn't know how to wipe or shower and had lied all the time trying to get me in trouble. I had to drive from Ohio to Kansas to finalize paperwork with the court. I took him and my friend for a 3-day fun trip trying to connect with him. He had a rough year. At the end of the trip, we were packing when he told me he locked my keys in the car. He then told hotel people I abducted him and he was trying to escape. They called the cops. He left and the cops came and arrested me and my friend. My paperwork was in the car that he locked the keys in, so I couldn't prove I had custody. It was found 3 hours later and bold-faced screamed and claimed I was a stranger. The cops said someone unlocked the car and I was able to show them custody paperwork. I spent 3 days trying to connect, bought him stuff, took him anywhere he wanted, had heart-to-heart over things. The entire time he was planning this. He later told me he was hoping they would end me. He hated me because I was poor and a female. He wanted to be in foster care. He did this a few times, even trying to get CPS to take away my daughter. The entire time, all I wanted was to make sure he grew up and didn't have to be in foster care. He was later diagnosed bipolar and with oppositional defiance disorder. My mother spent her time pampering him while they lived together. I was a single mother in college at the time. When my mom called me, she said CPS was trying to take him away from him, hurting her, and doing substances. And 9. I quit school, sold my stuff, and moved down. 6 months later, she was dead from lung cancer. I don't really have a relationship with my brother, half-brother, who was 13 years younger, and he was already suffering from mental issues. I spent the next 8 years trying to get him the help he needed. It was a constant struggle. He would lie and try his best to make every day hell for me. When he was 18, he wanted to stay in my house and play video games in his underwear while not cleaning up after himself. Unemployed, no goals. When I asked him to clean his area, he flipped one day and got violent with me to the point he was going to punch me. He threatened to end me and my daughter in our sleep. I had had enough, and I called the cops and kicked him out. We haven't talked since, really. I've moved out of state, and I think he's living with his dad, who disowned him and was in jail for attempted. I wasn't perfect, but I tried. I wanted him to heal and become a better person. I failed. I think about it often, and if I should have just allowed him to go into foster care. I wish him the best still. My brother was admitted and diagnosed by professionals a few times. He was medicated and had therapy. Unfortunately, he would at times refuse medications and go into therapy, especially when he had an episode. He's also as big as me, and no amount of asking, grounding, pleading would get him to go at times. He would refuse to bathe, piss, and poop all over his room. He did it often in his clothing in the closet for some reason, and punch holes in walls when he would have a fit. These are common in some bipolar cases, as such was told to me by a psychiatrist. He also was diabetic, so we also had to watch his sugar intake. Just wanted to clear that up. I did take him to proper people for help, both medical and mental. Damn, it must have took a lot to try to give this brother the proper help he needed. The sister was a great sister. Makes me love my siblings more now. Probably never gonna hear the end of this the next time we see each other. Lol. Story 7. Never shared this with anyone, but hey, I guess it's now or never. I have a stepbrother who I'm not sure why, but decided to slap my. I was approaching my teenage years and we both played basketball, so I thought it was just kind of normal. You see this stuff on TV where folks would smack each other's as a sign of a good job, so I kind of shrugged it off. But then things started getting weird. He would only do it when we were alone, and then it went from slapping to squeezing and sort of this massage-type movement with his hands, kind of like he was feeling it, for some reason. I remember one time he came from behind me, rubbed my before slapping it, and I dropped a bowl. My parents were in the other room and asked if we were all right, and he told me to tell them everything was. He and I didn't have much of a relationship anymore, and we no longer really talk, and honestly, I've kind of repressed it, which I know is not good for me. I also had a few questions about whether or not I know if he's still doing what he's doing or has done something like this to other family members or friends. The answer is I don't know, but I hope not. He's never brought it up or tried it ever again with me after several weeks of doing what he did. He and I generally only have a 1 to 3 sentence conversation when we see each other. Other folks have asked why I didn't tell my parents. As I mentioned, it felt normal at first, but in hindsight, it definitely wasn't. And I felt that my stepbrother's biological dad, would not believe me because I'm not his kid. I felt that my mom would have believed me, but my stepdad was emotionally cruel to everyone in the house, so I was a bit afraid and didn't want my mom to get hurt. But in hindsight, I should have said something. Story 8. Reading all of these makes me feel like my older brother wasn't actually as bad as I thought he was, but I still think he was awful nonetheless. He's just a bit under 11 years older than me, and growing up, he was constantly fighting with my mom, pushing her into screaming, emotionally manipulating her, and as he got older, he would get in her face and say such awful, hateful things that she would be shaking and crying for the rest of the day. He started targeting me too, because I started to defend my mom. He would render me the same way though, shaking, crying, and messed up for the day. He was also a thief, as he scammed me out of my belongings or straight up stole them to sell them. He also stole all of the money in me and my younger brother's piggy bank because he wanted to buy stuff he wanted. He would also steal my parents' stuff and hide it in the attic, only to give it back to them years later and claim he has found it. When I was 18, freshly dropped out of school due to severe mental health struggles, he once cornered me and got really in my face telling me I have absolutely no reason to have depression. Because his parents got divorced when he was little, he has a different dad, so he obviously had it harder. He had told me off like this because my mom told him to put his razor blades away as I was thinking about hurting myself, which he made fun of her for asking this. He said a lot of awful stuff to me that I prefer not to state, but didn't speak again until his father died almost a year later. When he started bullying my dad, his stepdad too, my dad kicked him out of the house. This was before his father died, by the way. Although we address it as him moving out to this day because we forgave him, I still care about him because he's my brother and I know he's got a lot of problems. But I also easily start hating him again anytime he's awful to my mom these days, which depends on his mood. He can be really sweet to her when he wants to be, and I will never be able to relax and trust him again, as my heart rate goes up almost any time I see him. He doesn't know this though, so he thinks I don't have any issues with him, but he honestly did leave me with some trauma. at least according to my therapist, after basically watching him verbally my mom for my entire life. Passive aggression and people yelling legit makes me panic. It's partly his fault. When he moved out, my friends and therapist all noted that my mental health noticeably improved. And even though the family has forgiven him, he's never allowed to live with us again. I still live with my parents and younger brother, and moving out is not expected of us. While we get along fine now, I don't think I could ever fully get past all that he did when I was growing up. I'm grateful that it wasn't worse than it was, as the stories here are generally incomprehensibly horrible, but just because there is worse doesn't make this any less damaging. If you read all this, I appreciate you. Crazy how much people have problems with their sibling. At least we're ending the video with a story that isn't too bad. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy. Parents, why did you realize your kid was a monster? The kid in story 2 is a monster compared to all the stories in this video. See you in that video.